You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. You wanted it. You got it. A radio program that helps teach you options trading inside and out, basic to complex. This is Options Bootcamp. Whether you want to learn how to protect your portfolio, generate income, or even become a master of volatility, your Options Bootcamp drill instructors, Mark Longo and Dan Passarelli, will break it all down for you. Old trading walks into a bar. New trading raises it. Unlike some guys, Tasty Trade puts traders first. Maybe you're the type to hunker down on your desktop for hours. Maybe you breeze by on your browser. Or maybe you just need that top-rated app right by your side. However you do it, Tasty Trade's got the most advanced tools you need to tackle stocks, options, futures, and more, all in one place. Chart your heart out with over 300 indicators. See opportunity differently with interactive curve analysis. Use backtesting to learn from the past and plan for the future. The platform is only the beginning of better trading. You'll also find low pricing, lots of education, and backup from a support team that really gets how traders trade. It's no wonder Investopedia named Tasty Trade the best broker for options in 2024. Genius loves company. Go to tastytrade.com/ride with us and see for yourself. Tasty Trade Incorporated is a registered broker-dealer and member of FINRA, NFA, and SIPC. Fall in boot. It's time to get into peak options trading shape. It's time for Options Bootcamp.
All right, everybody, that music means it is Education Wednesday. Time to roll out once again a little bit of the old OBC. My name, of course, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com. If you're listening on the pro side, coming to you a little bit early this week. Don't blame me. Blame Liberation Day and all the madness therein. Maybe we'll get to that fun a little bit in a sec. Of course, if you want to join the folks in the pro, and by the way, congratulations to, was it Douglas Bloom, I believe it was, our pro member. If I'm mispronouncing your last name, I apologize. But Douglas, congratulations. You are indeed the winner of our pro trading crate. Douglas Broom with an R, apologize. Douglas Broom. If you didn't win, don't blame me, blame Matt. He chose yesterday on the advisor's option out there. But congratulations to you. Everyone else in the pro, your names are automatically entered for the April Pro Trading Crate. If you want to join the fun, and clearly you do, it's a fun time, head on over to the pro, theoptionsinsider.com/pro. Special goodie going on right now for the folks who join up in the pro. You heard about it on Options Oddities last week. That is just for our Options Insider Pro people. If you know, you know, and a lot of you are taking advantage of it. It's pretty freaking cool, if I do say so myself. So check it out, theoptionsinsider.com/pro, the place to go to learn more. As we learn who's joining us on this special early edition of the old OBC. He's just waking up. This is usually where he's just starting his day drinking, listeners. We have interrupted it. None other than the black-hatted one himself, Mr. Dan Passarelli from Market Taker Mentoring. Mr. P, welcome back to an early OBC, sir.
Hey, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed here, my friend. Yeah, we're knocking it out, getting it done early. Early bird catches the worm, baby.
Since we are early, let me regale you really quickly and our listeners at the top of the show with a little tale. Are you ready for a tale? Ready for story time?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so I was joking earlier about what's driving all things behind the scenes, but we bravely, some might say foolishly, Dan, foolhardily, waded into the car buying war. You've been looking at cars for a little bit. Obviously, all this tariff madness kind of accelerated things a little bit, Dan. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. So we went checking out some stuff this weekend, and it was the kind of thing where you roll into the lot, and the car you already had an eye on would come in there to see was already rolling out the other way. It was already gone. So apparently we were after a very hot car as well, which we discovered. And so it got to the point very quickly where stock was gone. And now people were starting to battle, Dan, over just basically an IOU. They were begging to put down deposits on cars that were not even built yet. And they were not coming for months. These are not coming off the boat for months. And there's no guarantee. You heard different things from different dealers, whether they could hold the price or whether the price would change. So obviously if that car is coming from, let's say, Japan, and it's hit with a 25% tariff, that price is probably going to change. So folks are freaking out. There's no stock. We went to a dealer yesterday to try to have the privilege of putting down an IOU. And that was sold out from under us before we got there, Dan. So I was just like, what is happening? This is like a bad movie. So we ended up randomly, as we're leaving, we scan around, we find another dealer that happens to have one they say is on the lot. It's 20 minutes away. We said, you have a physical car? They said, yes. They said, we are coming. Hold it. If anyone tries to take it, fight them to the death. And so we got there. They were waiting for us out front. We get on the test drive, Dan. The car's already running. They're waiting for us. As we're driving in the test drive, the phone rings not 4 or 5 other times from the dealer. Word got out. 4 or 5 other people calling as we're just in the 10-minute test drive wanting to buy it at that moment. We get back to the dealership. They're already there waiting. Very angry people. When we walked in, the manager comes up. It's like, oh, yeah, because we had said we're going to buy it. They said, oh, but it's not signed yet, right? Meaning they had other people who were willing to outbid us. They wanted to have a bidding war on this last remaining in-stock vehicle. It was shady for days. People were coming in as we're doing it, trying to get the car as we're signing the pay. It was wild times. So I guess the moral of the story, Dan, is A, don't do that if you don't have to. We were in a situation where our other cars, one of our main cars is kind of crapping out. My kid's going to start driving soon, so we kind of need a nice backup new car. And so it just happened to have bad timing. On the plus side, Dan, I now have the one in-person model of this trim and everything else that apparently is left in the country. I don't know. So I could probably flip this thing for a decent amount if I was so inclined. That madness, Dan, is the reason why our schedule today is in flux. So don't blame me. Blame Liberation Day, Dan. What do you think? Did you take any lessons away from that harrowing story?
Yeah, you should have introduced options into this scenario. Like, hey, I'll buy the right to buy this car by June 30th at this price. That's the business that the car dealerships ought to get into if they were smart.
Yeah, I should have turned around and said, hey, you guy in the corner who's yelling for this car, pay me X amount. I'll walk away right now.
Yes.
Pay over the top of the sticker that is already inflated, and we'll see what we can do. So yeah, wild times, Dan, out there. Not only, usually you roll into a dealer, you like to have a little bit of negotiating power. This is the case where you take what they give you and you say, thank you, sir. And if you don't, there's literally 10 angry people behind you beating on the door, trying to take the contract out and trying to outbid you at the same time. So yeah, just wild. I've never experienced anything like that. So intriguing. Hopefully all this madness with the tariffs doesn't come to pass, where at least it's not, a protracted thing where all of a sudden there is no physical stock for a while. And if there is, it's significantly more expensive. So just a little cautionary tale for the folks out there, listeners, as we keep on rolling into a little bit of the old options drills.
Well, in boots. Time for our favorite pastime, option drills. We're going to take the strategies learned during the show and teach you how they can be employed to achieve a specific objective. Do you hear me? Yes, sir!
All right, everybody, welcome to a little bit of the old options drills. And, this is the portion of the show where we take an option strategy or, basic concept and we explore it in a little bit more detail. Sometimes we talk about some pro tips or tricks. And sometimes we bust a few myths, so that's kind of what we're going to do right now. Mr. Dan, I heard a rumor, a little birdie told me the other day, that you've been doing a little bit of myth busting on this new show that you're cheating on me with. The new Dan Passarelli joint out there. But the topic of the most recent one kind of caught my eye/ear because it's an intriguing one to be investigating right now. We've covered, pun intended, covered calls many times here on the show, listeners. But, you're taking a little bit different approach on the episode this time, Dan, talking about maybe some misperceptions or indeed some false narratives that are swirling around covered calls. So I will give you the Mythbuster hat, sir, and let you run with it, sir. What are some of these misperceptions or indeed false narratives that you are busting around covered calls?
Yeah, there's a lot of just falsehoods. And I'll tell you what, if you learn nothing over the past 5 years or so, the best lies are rooted in truth. So yeah, I think a lot of people look at covered calls in such a way where they say, well, the reason why covered calls are good is because of time decay, because you get theta every day, you make some money every day, and so therefore you have this advantage. And that is really, it's just not true. I mean, yes, it is an advantage, but it's not a fundamental advantage that isn't counterbalanced by other things. Like, I don't know. Like one of the last marathons that I ran, I only ran a few, but I was running with Kathleen, and we decided to run together. And so we're running, and I had to stop into the outhouse for like the third time in the first 10 miles. And Kathleen's like, geez, what's the matter with you? I'm just going to go. If you can catch up with me, catch up with me, which was fair. And so I ended up leaving, and I'm like, I'm going to catch up with her. And I just like sprinted. I ran. And so like, yeah, there's an advantage to running a marathon faster, right? Except for the disadvantage, which I encountered, where I was just like, whew, yeah, man, I just totally spent all my energy. So a lot of times when there's advantages, there's disadvantages that counterbalance it. And this idea of, oh, I'm collecting theta, so I have an advantage, it's not a net advantage. It's an advantage that has an equal and opposite disadvantage.
Folks are getting quite the story time on the show here today. First, the Liberation Day car battles, now marathon outhouses. I didn't think we were going there, Dan. When you started off with covered calls, you're getting in an outhouse in a marathon. You took that story in some interesting places, sir. If I do, how did that marathon end? How did it go? Did you finish it? Did you die along the way? Am I talking to a ghost?
Oh my goodness, I finished it, but it was I think it was my slowest one. Yeah, I just like at the end, it was in New York. I ran the New York one. And, you get to the end of the New York marathon and like you finish in Central Park, which, I don't know, sounds fine. But me being from the suburbs of Chicago, where everything's flat, if you're going up like a 10-foot elevation.
Any like 1 degree grade is foreign to you, sir.
Yes. And so I'm like, really? There's all these, and it's Central Park. It's not like hills, but compared to where I live, it was hills.
Plus, when it's at the tail end of 26 miles, even a little molehill could feel like Mount Everest, I would think, by the time you're done with that. So, if I finished a marathon, I probably wouldn't need the outhouse. I might need a casket or two. But I remember the last time I was in town for the Chicago Marathon. I happened to be out at Gibson's. Again, no more story timer. But and people were coming in after having just finished the marathon. I can't imagine, first off, running 26 miles then eating a giant steak. That would probably kill me on top of it. But B, everyone was just, they couldn't even walk. They were dragging themselves to the table. But they had their medals. They were happy. But they looked like the Walking Dead, Mr. Dan. I have the feeling you probably looked like that as well, listeners.
I did. I sure did.
As we keep on rolling right on into a little bit of the old mail call.
Mail call. Time to look at questions submitted by our listeners.
All right, everybody, let's get to the mail call. Let's have a little bit of fun. Dan, we're having some fun right now with some flash polls with you folks listening after the fact or live. Can play along with over there at Options on Twitter /X/ whatever the hell they're calling it these days. If you're listening down the road, as I know a lot of you are, just head on over there anyway. Chances are there's something cool waiting there for you. Dan, we had a fun one. You know, we've been talking about this, the wild madness of Palantir a lot. Everyone has these days. It's up, it's down, it's $100, it's 80, it's all over the place again. Yesterday, we saw a big block while we were doing the option block of the April 60 puts expiring pretty much at the end of this month, April 25th. So in the weeklies, listeners. And they were trading for 70 cents. They traded over 60,000 times. So we said 60 puts, end of April, 70 cents. Are you a buyer or a seller? Dan, which way do you feel like going? Are you not interested at all? To the hell with Palantir? And then B, which way do you think our audience is going?
The 60 puts end of April?
60 puts, end of April, 70 cents.
Yeah, I mean, I'd sell those with both hands, as we used to say on the trading floor, for sure.
Yeah, I probably would sell those too. And our audience did, but not perhaps by the margin you might expect, Dan. Only 44% wanted to sell them. 32% wanted to buy those puts. Interesting. And a sane 24% say they're staying the hell away from Palantir. That is also a sane path to take. By the way, Dan, it seems like I jumped the gun going out and buying a car myself because our chat, very generous that they are, our pro members have offered to buy me a Shiba Inu Lambo, sir. So how could I pass that up? I should have taken that. A fool that I am. I could have had a sweet Shiba Lambo. All Shiba has to do, I think, is get to like $25. And then we can all have Lambos. All right, let's keep rolling out here to, well, this is an interesting one, very much germane to stuff we've talked about in this show in the past. This is more of our traditional question of the week. That was kind of more of a fun flash poll we did during the option block yesterday. But Dan, we're kind of getting back to the old limbo poll question, which is quite simply, how low will you go when you're trading options? At what stock or underlying price do you just cry out, the heck with that? I'm just trading the stock or just trading the underlying, whatever it is. Is it $10? Is that your cutoff? Is it $5? Is it $2? Or Dan, are you a no limits wild man? And then which way do you think our audience is going?
Well, for me, it depends on the specific strategy. With our options rater, which is our short squeeze finder, I have no limit because the best ones of those are stocks that are trading below $10. So with those, no limit. With my earnings trade, total earnings domination, my limit is $25. I won't go below there because those time spreads just don't work out if it's below $25. Other than that, if I have to give a more general answer, probably about $15 or so. Yeah, $15, I'd say.
That's a pretty high cutoff. Usually we see around $25 for your one strat. That's pretty high as well. And then if I get it, if you're doing that particular strategy, I can see why that makes sense. And then 15 in general. Interesting. So if it gets cheap. You're like our buddy, the Viceroy, used to be $10 and he was out. You're 15 and out, which is kind of interesting. Brian Overby, he's wherever Ford is trading and below, he's out. And that's his cutoff. Our pro member here, Mr. Age Del Aquarius, he says he follows the Viceroy's advice. He says $10 is the floor. The lowest I've gone is doing the wheel with Ford. Yeah, he's talking about Ford again. Everyone loves Ford. Ford is everyone's barometer, Dan, for how low they will trade options on a stock for. I think what's Ford now? 9.25 or something like that. So there you go, Dan. That's the official answer. 9.25. But our audience right now, Dan, they're choosing $10, 25% of them. So that's the number one choice. Actually, I take it back. The no limits choice, Dan. 43%. We have a bunch of no limits wild men and ladies in the audience. What do you think, Dan?
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, for me, it depends on the strategy and, I mean, close enough. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely some strategies where, oh yeah, show me that $6 stock. I'm in.
Bunch of no limits wild men. That's in our chat too. Nichols saying he has no limits. So there you go. A lot of no limits wild men and ladies, Dan, in our audience. That's taking it right now. 43%, followed by 25% saying $10 is your cutoff. And then going down from there, 19% for $5, 13% for 2. Agree, disagree at Options is the place. That is still live. It'll be live, I should say, as you're listening to this a little bit later today on the on-demand side, listeners. So you too can play ball. We're fair with all of you. A couple of quick payoffs from last week. Dan, we were talking about a VIX April 2030 vertical. They traded for 77 cents, as well as the April 22 calls. Both traded for size last week, exactly for 77 cents. We said, gun to your head, you got to buy one. Which one would you rather buy? And the April 2030 vertical took it 42%, followed by 26% for the April 22 calls. 21% say they don't want to touch either, and 11% said they'd rather sell that vertical, which is kind of interesting. And then we also talked about the April 18 puts going up for size last week for 42 cents, just straight up April. You want to buy or sell those? 2/3 of our audience exactly wanted to sell those. Only 1/3 wanted to buy. And Dan, we were joking last week about would you trade wine if it was available in a liquid, quote unquote, tradable form as a tokenized asset? And Dan, I know you wanted to take delivery on this with both hands, but our audience said no, 61%, sir. What are your thoughts? Don't want to trade wine. They wanted to buy the April 18 puts and VIX for 42 cents, and they want to buy the April 2030 call spread in VIX for 77 cents, Dan.
Yeah. So for the VIX, I would be a buy of the 4 choices. I would be a buyer of the April 2030 call spread for 77 cents. And that's one where, I just think that one's universally better. The only reason you would choose the 22 calls at 77 cents is if you're looking for it to just really spike and blast off. You end up with a lower break even with the call spread. So I like that. Yeah, I actually kind of like that trade already. I got to take a harder look at that when we're done here.
Might have missed it. I think it's already past 77 cents. Might have missed that one, sir. But
drats.
But I agree with you. That is, I think, definitely the superior choice. Certainly of those two. They're interesting stuff. Listeners, did you get in on it? I think it doubled pretty quickly within a day or two. It was trading about $1.40, Dan. So yeah, that was a good do, as the kids say. Speaking of the kids, let's get out to them now. Dan, this name sounds familiar. Stephen Womack. I do believe he's written in before. He says, hi, guys. Still loving the old OBC. Oh, yes, he has. He has written in before. He says, I believe I've listened to every show. Wow, Dan, he's the one. He's the one who's listened to every show. Wow, you deserve a special prize, Mr. Womack, for putting up with every episode of Dan. Me, I get I'm fun, but Dan, okay, that's an effort. Okay, you know what? Our producers will reach out to you. Maybe a fun prize will be in the offing for you. But he says, I've listened to every show. I've been trading options for about 4 years now. So, wow, he condensed all of OBC into 4 years, Dan. That's no mean feat. Somewhere around 1,700 trades. Wow, he's been a busy fellow in 4 years, Dan. Oh, he's read your book. I've read Dan's book. What I could get down of Natenberg. Yeah, Natenberg's a little dry, admittedly. And there's a well-thumbed copy of Brian Overby's Options Playbook. Yeah, on my desk. He's got all the basics, Dan. There you go. I've worked hard to try and get a grip on basic options concepts. Well, sounds like you're doing all the right things there, Stephen. He says, but there's still one thing that stymies me. Gamma. Oh, I get what gamma is. I can parrot back the definition. It is a second-order derivative that measures the rate of change of delta as the price of the underlying stock or fund changes. Great. What I can't get my head around is how to use gamma in my options decision-making. When you guys start talking about stuff like gamma scalping, my eyes glaze over. Uh-oh, maybe we need to dial it back if we're losing the Stevens of the world, Dan. He says, can you help me break through this block? I use delta, I use theta, and vega. I understand and I use them all, but gamma, I'm clueless. Thanks for helping me out. Well, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. First off, you're not alone. Of all the Greeks, gamma is usually the most difficult one for people to wrap their heads around for the exact reason that you point out, Stephen. Very intuitively, I should add, that it is a second order Greek. Everything else is kind of a straight 1-to-1. Delta's pretty easy. Theta probably is second for people because it's a decay thing. It's not quite as intuitive. It's also kind of the inverse of gamma. So there's a little bit of relationship. If you're confused about gamma, you're probably confused about theta. But still, people can come to terms with that, especially if they're selling options. And vega, usually they can wrap their heads around that. But you're right, gamma, the rate of change of another Greek, you are not alone. It is a spooky concept. It is an intimidating concept out there. It is kind of interesting when you think about it on the surface that it is effectively a second order Greek, making it into the big 4/5 if you want to throw rho in there as well. So kind of interesting. Dan, you literally wrote the book on the Greeks and he read it. Maybe you need to add another chapter, sir, because he's still confused. Give him some guidance. He's kind of stymied when it comes to gamma. How should he really be using it?
Yeah, so in a way, I mean, I would say, and by the way, hi, Stephen. Nice to hear from you. I would say don't get super hung up on gamma. I would say for most retail traders, all you really need to know about gamma is just the high level conceptual stuff. And that is, it's the change in delta. And when your own options, you have positive gamma, and that's always good for you. When you're short options, you have negative gamma, and that's always bad for you. Simple example is, even if you are just buying a call, like, hey, I think the stock's going to go up, I'm going to buy this call. Okay, great. When the stock goes up, your call gets more in the money, thus your delta gets bigger and you make money at an increasing rate. That's good. If the stock goes down, you're losing money on your call, but your delta is getting smaller, so you're losing money at a decreasing rate, which is arguably good too. Now, you want to get into gamma scalping. I would say it's okay if your eyes glaze over because you're never going to do it. I have trained some of my smartest student traders to do it, and it's just impossible for a retail trader to do it. I won't train anybody else because I don't think a retail trader can make it work. The idea is basically like, if you think of a straddle, when straddles go up, you make money because the delta on your call gets bigger than the delta on your put gets smaller, which is just the gamma of both of them. And when it goes down, the delta on your put gets bigger faster than the delta on your call gets smaller. So it's just delta. You get positive deltas when it go up and negative deltas when it goes down. So if you were to hedge that, when the stock goes up on your straddle, you would sell shares to hedge it. And then when it goes back down, you would buy shares to hedge it. So that's where the scalping word comes in there. Because theta is the opposite of gamma, you have to scalp enough stock on an average daily basis to make up for the theta that you lose on an average daily basis. And that's a pretty big way of how I made my living as a professional trader. I focused a lot on that and got good at it, but I don't do it now because you can't do it in a retail account. So that was a long answer. I hope that helps.
No, that was a good answer, sir. I was trying to think as you were talking, like, what is a specific use case right now for a retail trader where you need to know that your gamma is X, your gamma is 6. You better know that right now. I can't really think of one, Dan. So I'm in the same boat as you. I think you're okay knowing conceptually how gamma works and also knowing conceptually where your gamma is going to be highest or lowest. We've joked on the network many times about your 0-day contracts being gamma bombs. We say that because those contracts in that near dated expiration cycle are pretty much all gamma. They're wild, untamed beasts. All you really need to know about that is that, of course, whatever your delta is, it's going to change rapidly as the day goes on. And that's all you really need to know. And if you go farther out in time, you have less gamma. You're less gamma sensitive in your trading. So as long as you understand that, if you come in buying a call worth $1 with an extremely high gamma, a 0-day option, you have to know, sounds like you do know this intuitively, Stephen, that's going to change. It could, obviously, if it's out of the money, it could easily go away very quickly as the day progresses. And if it moves around, that delta is going to change wildly. As long as you understand that intuitively, knowing that your delta is X, is your gamma is X, is not really a material thing. You want to We used to know what our gamma was as market makers, as Dan pointed out, but that was for a very specific reason. We wanted to be able to scalp it, and also we wanted to do some basic risk management for our entire position. We had to know, especially on certain days, and usually got pretty wild around expiration day. You had to know kind of how your delta was going to change in various scenarios. And that was where we really needed to know our gamma. As a retail trader, I'm hard-pressed to think, as I use a lot of retail tools that you folks use now. And my gamma on this position, is X. I don't really think in those terms, and I don't think you need to either. You know where your gamma is highest, know where your exposure to gamma is highest, know if you're selling those very near-dated options, you're short gamma. So now you have to be very sensitive to every little tick in the underlying. And it sounds like you understand that stuff. So I think you could almost use gamma as kind of a shorthand. People these days, a lot, especially in the 0-day world, are saying if they're long gamma, they're long a bunch of 0-day premium. If they're short gamma, they're short a bunch of 0-day premium. That's kind of the shorthand and the vernacular that has developed around it in the modern retail trading landscape. And I think you're fine using that same, nomenclature as you're trading. So if your eyes glaze over, don't sweat it. You should know what your delta is, obviously. You want to know how much you're going to make or lose as the stock swings around. I think you should have some knowledge of your theta, especially if you're doing short premium strategies. You want to know how much you're collecting. And then, of course, Vega, if you got a little bit longer term stuff out there, you want to know your exposure to vol. So you should be knowledgeable about that. But I think knowing your gamma ranges in this market, where it's highest, where it's lowest, where you have the most gamma exposure to it, obviously right there at the money on that near-dated contract. As long as you have an understanding of that and you have a decent working knowledge of the other Greeks, I think you're pretty good. Man, that's an interesting question. Again, Dan, our long-term listeners, very astute, Mr. Dan. All right, let's keep rolling. We got some more questions. I'll get a couple more people on here really quickly. Let's go. I like this handle, Dan. Mr. Genty. Mr. Genty wants to know. He said a very straightforward question, also a timely one. It is April. He says, are there any important tax implications of options trading? And obvious caveat applies. Neither Dan nor I are CPAs or certified tax professionals. So if you want official tax advice, obviously go consult. And obviously you want a good accountant who understands options as opposed to just, Joe Blow down at H&R Block. But that said, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. Obviously, a lot of your stuff you're going to do now, if you're familiar with trading stocks and you have a brokerage account, a lot of the stuff's going to be very similar. You have long-term and short-term capital gains. Most of the stuff you're going to do in the options trading world is going to fall into the short-term capital gains bucket with an exception. I'll get there in a second. You're going to get that Schedule D. If you have a good broker, it's going to break down a lot of the cost basis of your trades for you and everything anyway. You're not really going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting at the end of the day for figuring some of those out. Maybe if your broker isn't as good, you might have to do a little bit of extra heavy lifting in terms of when this trade was open, what the actual basis is, and when that. But most brokers have gotten a pretty good handle on. If not, they offer usually access to a third-party service that will kind of tabulate that for you. Might be for a little bit of an extra fee, but it's probably worth it just to save yourself some hassle. So that part is pretty straightforward, similar to what we're talking about with stocks. A couple of exceptions. You may have heard some people talking about if you sell a covered call against your stock, that's treated taxably as an instantly taxable event like you sold your stock. That is not the case. That has been proposed many times, and it's probably floating around somewhere in Congress or in a legislature near you, maybe. Right now, as we talk, this is floated around a lot. But as of right now, that is not the law of the land. Doesn't seem like with the current administration that will happen. But that has been proposed a few times. Let's say you have a stock at 60, you sell a 65 call. Bam, that's like selling a stock at 65. It makes absolutely no sense to anyone who's ever traded, but that has been proposed. That is not, thankfully, the case right now. And also, obviously, if you're doing a lot of SPX or futures options trading, you should be aware of the 1256 tax treatment, which is effectively 60-40 tax treatment. So you're going to get 60% long-term, 40% short-term. Very favorable tax treatment, regardless of how long you held the trade. If you just held it for a day, you're still getting 60-40 tax treatment. So that is a benefit of trading products like SPX and other 1256 type contracts. So those are just a couple off the top of my head, Dan, tax considerations. Dan, anything you want to add here for the creatively named Mr. Genty?
Oh boy. Outside of what you covered here, geez, I honestly can't really think of anything offhand to add, and I don't know, I usually just stay away from even talking about taxes just because I mean, I hire an accountant to do mine. I don't have the expertise. So yeah, sorry, I'm not helpful on this one, really.
Dan likes to throw around the big bucks with an account. No, that's actually good advice. I definitely recommend a professional. If you can swing it out there, listeners, it is helpful. Just make sure they understand that you're a pretty active trader. So you have a little bit different needs maybe than your standard person who just rolls in with, your W-2 and that's about it. Maybe a mortgage deduction, But interesting stuff out there. Mr. Dan, we did it. We survived an early show full of tales of woe and car liberation battles and almost dying in marathon outhouses. And we even squeezed in some covered calls and some gamma, sir. What do you think?
Yeah, this was a fun show. This was, I liked this one a lot, actually.
So if folks want to check out that podcast episode we were talking about at the start of the show, they want to hear some more myths busted about covered calls, where should they go? What should they do, sir?
Yes, I recorded that one early. It should be out soon. But the podcast is called Wealth Building with Options, and you can grab it on any podcasting platform, Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever. But it's Wealth Building with Options, and it's all about covered calls and cash secured puts. And I'd love if you gave it a listen and let me know what you thought.
I thought the podcast was called Super Sexy Day Drinking. When did you change the title, sir?
My lawyer advised me.
I guess I subscribe to something very, very different now. I don't know. I'm not sure what I've been listening to. It's a wild show, Dan. All right, check it out over there, Wealth Building with Options, Mr. P. And when you're checking this stuff out, make sure you check out the old MTM Market Taker Mentoring. Don't forget the second T for Theta. That is not going to do it for this special early edition on the network today. I will be back in your ear holes for all of our pro folks in a little bit with a kind of a Just the Facts, ma'am edition of the Futures Rundown before I go back out to finalize my battles with the mad folks on Liberation Day. And then we're back again tomorrow, of course, with the Flowmaster in hand for the option block, followed, of course, by This Week in Futures Options. Friday, Vol Views, Dr. Vic, special guest, should be a good time. And then after that, one final time, exclusively for you pro folks, we're getting wild once again with a little bit of options oddities. So make sure you check it out. It's been wild. It's been a banger of late. A lot of great trades going on in there. That in and of itself, definitely, obviously, worth the price of admission, let alone everything else we got cooking over there. So a lot of fun stuff. Check it out if you haven't done so yet, theoptionsinsider.com/pro. Then Dan and I are back next week with another great Options Bootcamp. Stay safe out there, everybody.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.